popcorn junkiers. Popcorn junkies. Oh, no, you are a junkie, aren't you? Welcome to this review of Wicked for Good. It's unusual in that I'm in the car. This is a review of the sequel to Wicked. The Ariana Grande, Cynthia Erivo, Jonathan Bailey, Jeff Goldblum, Michelle Yeoh, absolute kind of crowd-pleasing cinema adaptation, big screen adaptation of Wicked the musical. When we reviewed the first film, obviously me, Nadia and Maddie, our eldest, all reviewed it and we all loved it. We all really enjoyed it. We all got different things from it. I think the richest thing I took away from the first film was Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, but it very much felt like that was the first film was Cynthia Erivo's film. And wow, I mean, I felt her performance, despite it being in a sort of what I would characterize as flimsy, disposable kind of musical adaptation, she gave it everything. She was Oscar worthy, but sometimes, you know, even saying that doesn't really speak to how granular, deep, intense, how brilliantly she played the witch that she plays. And I never get the names right of any of the witches, so I'm just going to refer to them as the actors and actresses in question. Whereas I thought the first film was very much Cynthia Erivo's film, interestingly, I would argue that this second film is very much Ariana Grande's film. And I would also say that this second film is infinitely darker in tone, dour, sinister, and not so cheery. It wasn't so flimsy, it wasn't so breezy, it wasn't so bouncy. This half, or this second half of Wicked, is very much, and really this is in keeping with the theatrical stage show, this is the side of the story that really digs into and delves into Cynthia Erivo's witch essentially being ostracized and castigated and characterized as evil. This is the point at which Ariana Grande is in the ascendancy, if you like, even though Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum, none of them think that Ariana Grande is really up to it. And that although she doesn't really have the magic, it's all artifice, it's all artificial, it's all pretend. Ariana Grande is characterized as good and Cynthia Erivo is characterized as bad. And really this is a film that explores that whole dynamic of the Emerald City of Oz needing to promote and telegraph to the rest of Oz a narrative that's fake. And whilst I very much felt that the first film tickled at the edges of a much deeper story, this sequel really allows you to bed into the idea that actually this whole fucking Wizard of Oz story is really a narrative about deceit, state control, propaganda, the need for the state, or the need of the state to control the narrative, the story, to define who the goodies and the baddies are. And I don't like to bring global politics into absolutely everything, but I don't know if you remember when the recent Superman movie came out, it was hard not to feel that within, baked into that narrative, that story, that film by James Gunn, parallels were sort of, it felt like purposefully drawn between an oppressive, genocidal nation, an oppressed and disenfranchised, occupied kind of population too. So it felt like the genocide, the Gaza genocide was very much part of the exploration of Superman. Well, by the same extension, whilst it's in no way overt, there's a very compelling argument that's to be had to say you could approach this film, you could approach the two films, Wicked and Wicked for Good, as a kind of meditation on the ways in which mainstream society, the system, wants to keep their populations in abeyance by controlling the truth, controlling the media, spinning lies, making them feel that what's good and what's evil is very simple and straightforward. And I always remember when I saw the first ever The Wizard of Oz as a kid, it was one of those films that Nadia can't stand it kind of gives her the creeps. I've always loved it. I always found it magical. I always found, obviously, the switch from black and white to colour always fascinating and mesmerising and just magical. But I also found that there were other elements within it that were kind of curious, as in the extreme colour. It felt so overbearing and over the top and so hyper real that it was untrustworthy. And then you had all these ideas of these characters who'd had a heart taken away, or they didn't have a heart, they didn't have a brain, they didn't have courage, etc. And so I was always drawn to, and then there was the final part always in The Wizard of Oz, the Judy Garland one, where you had it discovered, and I never ceased to be amazed as a child when they'd pull back the curtain or pull back the arrests, and there was a stupid, irritating little old man who was basically talking into a kind of loudspeaker. And he was the wizard. It was the con. It was the myth. It was the deceit. It was the spin. It was the propaganda. I mean, I wasn't thinking all those things as a kid. I was just thinking, oh, that's really wrong. But actually, that's everything we go through in society. That's everything we've been going through for the last, certainly 2 years of something like the genocide. But it's something that's been going on through COVID, through so many mainstream experiences, if you like. The mainstream, the system, the government. And in this film, in this sequel, you very much feel, and I think Jeff Goldblum is absolutely fantastic in this film, actually. There's much more of him. But this film really reveals what a sinister, manipulative, Machiavellian, controlling master of ceremonies he is, as well as Michelle Yeoh. I mean, the deceit and the con of magic, the con of goodness, right down to Ariana Grande's bubble that floats around, but she has to press a button to create the bubble. It's not real magic. This isn't real magic. She needs to create the image or the myth or the facade of real magic. And then you have the narratives around, in the first film, you had the animals that were being eradicated and sort of driven from the land. I mean, what does that remind us of? And then in this film, you have an incredibly sort of poignant and historically metaphorical kind of moment where the Munchkins are being, if not ushered onto trains, quite the opposite, ushered off trains. There are signs saying no animals, no Munchkins. You couldn't help but feel, or I couldn't help but feel throughout this film, or, the sense of segregation, the sense of two-tier justice, the sense of the system, the mainstream, the Emerald City as lived by the normal citizens, that their existence and the Emerald City lived on a lie, was built upon deceit, control, slavery, exploitation, segregation, apartheid. I mean, and this isn't a stretch. The first film has it all around speaking animals, the animals, all that kind of stuff. And then in this film, you've got it very much around the Munchkins too. And so it really is a story about how society, the systems and the levers, quite literally, the Wizard of Oz's levers behind the curtain is pulling the strings, quite literally, of who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. So all that said, I felt more Ariana Grande's film, although to be brutally honest, it's an equally shared kind of gift. Cynthia Erivo, they're both sensational. You can't put a piece of paper between their performances in the first film and the performances in this. They've given it everything. They've been immersive. They've methoded it to the point that, as we've said and discussed elsewhere, their kind of, their junket and press interviews have become a little bit odd, though I would argue that the intensity of their relationship within the film, within the fictional land of Oz, has infinitely more authenticity, depth and believability to it than any of their kind of weirdnesses in press junkets and press interviews that they've been doing to support the film. So I found this a very dark film. It's quite a somber film. It was quite not depressing, but it was quite it's funny. Maddie said to me, did you like any of the tunes in this, any of the songs in this one? I'm telling you now, I don't feel there's a single notable musical song, apart from one or two from the first film, that I know that wicked fans, wicked aficionados are like, what are you talking about? The whole fucking thing is musical theatre art. It's the Shakespearean, or it's the Shakespeare of musicals. I wasn't getting that at all. For me in a musical, I want something, not that it's got a catchy tune, but I want something that if I heard it again, I'd be like, I just found, whilst there were lots of sung interludes throughout this, I didn't find any kind of rousing or emotive or memorable or rememberable songs, if I'm brutally honest. Other notable things that I did like about this, I thought Cynthia Erivo's hideout, she's banished, she goes into the woods. I thought it was intriguing that it kind of reminded me of Yoda's kind of zone in The Empire Strikes Back, you know, when Luke goes to find him and learn the ways of the Jedi, and they're wandering around in Yoda's swamp. One of the most magical, mystical environments, fictional environments in cinema that I've ever witnessed. And so in a weird way, I wanted to hang out a little bit longer with Cynthia Erivo in the woods or in the swamp. You know, there's a moment where Jonathan Bailey, he's in an arranged marriage, he's marrying Ariana Grande, then he gets dragged off and he's like, no, don't want to, and he reunites with Cynthia. And they have a moment in this, guys, where they're kind of canoodling and they're getting romantic, Cynthia and Jonathan Bailey, and they're kind of kissing and they're all this kind of stuff. And then I mean, it's not explicit at all, but there's a moment where just before he goes in for the kiss and they go in for the clinch, he says something along the lines of, I've never felt so wicked. And then it pans up and then we come back and he's topless. This is sex. That's as close as you get to sex in The Wizard of Oz. Awful. I know the Munchkins were up to it all the time, but, you know, do you know what I mean? It was quite sexy in its own way. As I say, Jeff Goldblum, I thought I sometimes find Jeff Goldblum performs Jeff Goldblum. And as I was saying to someone the other day, that in and of itself isn't necessarily a problem because Jeff Goldblum's very watchable. It's a bit like John Malkovich. You know, you always know you're getting John Malkovich, and I find John Malkovich really watchable, or Nick Cage. But with Jeff Goldblum, sometimes I just think it's all a bit samey. But I actually thought he gave the role of the wizard a little bit more here, especially when he discovers or realises that actually his paternity has some impact and influence on Cynthia Erivo. Oh, and the other thing that this film allows you to do is, which I quite like this, is indulge in the connecting DNA, if you like, filmic DNA between the original Wizard of Oz and all the characters and who they are and where they come from and how they slot into this. I thought this film was just going to have, you know, the foursome, you know, Dorothy, the Lion, the Tin Man and the Straw Man. I thought it was just going to have them all just be, you know, shots of them from behind. Well, they do. And it is, especially with Dorothy. They don't try and sort of replace Judy Garland with Dorothy. But in this film, you get the creation of the Tin Man, who kind of basically has a spell cast on him, and he comes out. He's one of the Munchkins, and he's quite creepy. I found him quite creepy. There was a scene where he was kind of looking at people and kind of staring at Ariana Grande at one point, and so I thought he was creepy. I quite like that. And the Straw Man is Jonathan Bailey becomes the Straw Man, so that's all quite good. But in a sort of strangely on the spectrum kind of completionism that I wanted, I kind of demanded and wanted to know, well, who was the lion? And then of course I thought, well, I suppose the lion was just one of the many animals. But I also felt like I missed an origin story for the lion, if I'm honest. So I liked all of that. The curious other little details, like fucking hell, at the beginning of this film, you've got the behind the scenes. Is it the H2? What's the HS2? What's that great big fucking motorway thing? No, train transport, HS2 that they're building and they're now cancelling, and they were going to connect Midlands. You see the construction work of the Yellow Brick Road, and I didn't know how to feel about that at first. At first I was like, hang on a minute, I don't know if I want to see the construction work of the original Yellow Brick Road. But then another part of me thought, yeah, this whole thing, the whole Wicked franchise, or the whole Wicked idea, is a little bit like, heading off to Shakespeare for a moment, bear with me, Tom Stoppard years ago wrote a play called Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, which was like a long play about what was going on in the minds and hearts of two characters, bit-part characters, who appear for a very tiny moment in Hamlet. But he decided to fictionalise and dramatise an imaginary kind of dialogue and sense of the two of them off stage, whilst Hamlet was going on stage. But he made the off-stage Rosencrantz and Guildenstern on stage, if you know what I mean, with his play. This is like that. This is all the bits around. This is all the behind the scenes. So, for example, things like I didn't realise, of course, the ruby slippers or the shoes. There's no place like home. They belong to Cynthia Erivo's sister in the wheelchair, and she's the one who was crushed by the house that's picked up by the tornado or the twister and then landed on. But I wanted to see the feet curl in again. But then I got confused because I thought, wasn't the original witch the one that was cycling in the wind in The Wizard of Oz? Like, wasn't she the one who got crushed? And I didn't get a sense of how evil Cynthia's sister in the wheelchair was. So that all confused me a little bit. But all that said and done, I actually found there was a lot of satisfaction in trying to connect the original characters, the original storyline, the original kind of signifiers, if you like, of The Wizard of Oz, and connect them to this film and make sense of things. There wasn't much scope for Jonathan Bailey to be funny. There wasn't like that wonderful dancing kind of singing scene where he was bouncing around everywhere in the library, I think, in the first film. He was altogether darker. Michelle Yeoh was much darker and more sinister. Wasn't too sure about her singing. You know, the sets are gorgeous, the design was gorgeous, costumes, makeup, etc. But I really enjoyed Ariana Grande. I think it's a big ask, though, on her story arc for her to lose her husband and lose everything and still not resent and sort of hate Cynthia Erivo. Their friendship kind of pushes through it. And so, in a weird way, once again, right at the very end of the whole film, and I guess is this what happens? I can't remember. Is this what happens at the end of the stage play, the stage musical? At the very end, you know, she stages her own, or she fakes her disappearance by shrinking. I'm shrinking with the water situation, which of course is another emblematic moment, isn't it, at the end of The Wizard of Oz, which is so fucking fantastic. But again, that speaks to how everything is smoke and mirrors, everything is mirage, everything is a facade, everything is fake and fraudulent. And so even Cynthia Erivo's demise, so she can actually escape and live a life of kind of peace and tranquility with her newly acquired straw man in the form of Jonathan Bailey, even her death is something that is sort of presented to the public as truth, but it's not really truth. And so really the whole Wizard of Oz thing and the whole Wicked whole thing became for me a really, I find it a more enjoyable and richer watch when I think, wow, look at how mainstream entertainment here is actually engaging with the idea that we're all being sold a pup, we're all being conned, we're all being told to be part of a system that's a complete lie. Don't trust the government, don't trust the wizard when he says she's the baddie, or he's the baddie, or she's the goodie, or he's the goodie. There's something else at work. They're trying to keep you in abeyance. They want you to behave. They want you to do what you're supposed to do in order to prop up the system. Well, tell them all to fuck off. And if there's a message at the end of Wicked, it is live for yourself, and good is better than evil, and good can be anywhere. Question the very things that they tell you that are evil. As I say, it was a much darker, it was a much more solemn, it was a much more somber, it was a slower, there were even fewer, I felt, kind of songs that got you going. But it was intense, and there were some really dark moments. You know, they're drinking vials of potion to take away pain. I mean, it's like opium addiction. You've got basements full of caged animals, and you've got segregation on public transport, and you've got people being crushed by houses. So it becomes quite twisted and quite dark, and I guess that's the way the stage show goes. So to that extent, no surprises. Beautifully executed, beautifully done. I would give this 80 out of 100.